prolific author, and it's not Enid Blyton. So any guesses? It's Agatha Christie. So her husband had to proofread her word for her because he's starting to see. But what's interesting is that she was regarded as slow. You're not hearing? That's okay. I'll just do it like that. All right. Okay, so it's Agatha Christie. Go ahead. Okay, so today what I want to do is just maybe get some of your observations, because you must have people in your class who haven't learned to read because they didn't go to school, or because maybe they had poor language skills as a young person and didn't develop the necessary pre-reading skills, so phonics and reading passed them by, or they are dyslexic. So I wondered if anybody sort of could just come up with some of the observations you have of the dyslexic students. Oh, yes.
I can identify the such, but you know, there are students and there are sometimes some of the better higher level readers who are more comfortable with longer words, but they read shorter words back to front. Was is so, and on is no, and it's consistent.
Yes, okay. So I'm sure you didn't hear her. She said that sometimes with the higher level readers, they're comfortable with the long words, but it's the short words like was, which they muddle with so, on with no, and yes, from with form, yes. So that leads me to, actually, it's a sequencing difficulty. We'll talk about that. They're not actually seeing it the wrong way around, because if you put those words in a row and ask them to circle the ones that look like this one, they'd be able to do it. But it just, they get the sequence muddled. Okay, so yes, that's absolutely excellent observation. Anything else you notice about them? Yes?
I'm a student who constantly mixes up the B and the D.
Yeah, that B and D, yes. Little people mix up B's and D's and it's not a problem, but if it continues from sort of standard 1, standard 2, with the reading problem, it really is indicative of dyslexia, and it's an orientation difficulty, so that's another difficulty. So we have sequencing so far, orientation, very, more severe dyslexics might even do a flip, like W and M, or F and T, and U and N sometimes. Yeah.
I think just generally, some students seem more quick-witted than others, and then you're surprised when you see the mistake in their writing when you hear them reading.
Okay. Surprising difficulty, I think that's a very good observation. She's saying some students seem more quick with it, and for some students you're surprised when you see their writing, the level of difficulty they're demonstrating with it. So, surprising difficulties, what you don't expect. Anything else you noticed? How many people? Yeah.
We have one student who really takes like a lot of time to just make sure he writes very well, but it's just like time it takes him to form each letter. I don't know if that's
She's talking about time, a particular student who takes a long time to form each letter, very careful, and yes, a lot of dyslexics have difficulty with fine motor control, and add that the difficulty with orientation of the letter, making sure you get it right. Time is a real enemy of dyslexia. It's a lot of time, a dyslexic, if you give them more time, it will make a lot of difference in their lives. Anything else you noticed?
Some students, they recognize all the sight words, but if they see them in a passage or sentence, they would know that. I don't know if that's indicative of a dyslexia.
She's talking about the fact that some students would know the sight words, and when they see it in a passage, they may not recognize it. And in the old days, you know, dyslexia was first labeled as word blindness, because the neuropsychologist who was looking into this, to him it seemed like they hadn't seen that word before. And you do get that feeling that, I've never seen this before. So that recognition of that string of letters, maybe in a different situation, not in the situation that they were doing it as a drill. Yes. Yes, definitely. Okay, so obviously a lot of people have had experience with dyslexics, and you're going to have students who, you correct me if I'm right, students who didn't have the opportunity to go to school, yeah? Learners who didn't learn reading because they had a poor, what we call phonological base. They didn't have good language skills from the home. And so when they went to school, this whole linking of these letters to these sounds didn't really make sense to them. So if you think of a little person and they can't even tell you what the first sound is in a word, then it's very difficult for them to put that whole phonics thing that they're learning in school to map that onto reading. Okay, and I'll tell you two stories. One is a 17-year-old boy I was testing, and he knew all his letter sounds, really well taught. And when I was testing his reading, one of the words is bun. You're not supposed to help, but I said, Christian, you know this word, you know this letter. What is it? He said, "Book." I said, what's this one? Oh. He said, what's this one? I said, so there it is, but what does that say? And he looked at me, and he smiled like from ear to ear, and he said, it's bun. And he was 17, and he never realized he could do that. So there's this big disconnect of teaching of reading in schools where you learn all these letter sounds in phonics class, and then you get your book, and it says, here is Carla. And is not even a phonetically correct word, unless, like ALTA, you teach it S says sometimes. Because we don't do that in school. S says, and it says today, tomorrow, and the next day. Okay, so let's get on to my talk. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you some brain research. Well, I'm not going to show you the brain research, I'm going to talk about it, because I think it's important that you understand what's going on in these learners' brains that makes it so difficult for them. One, you'll be much more empathetic and patient. And two, you'll feel more empowered, because you'll feel that you can make a difference because you know what's happening, and so you know what to do. And that was. It's okay, I think the next thing was I was going to see if there were any questions. Okay, so go ahead. All right, so we owe, come over here, we owe a lot of what we know about dyslexia to this man, Dr. Albert Labuda from Harvard Medical School. I actually saw him speak in, I think it was in Washington, and he was a young boy with dark black hair. So this research has been out for a long time, and yet, you know, mainstream education doesn't know about it. Okay. So what he did is he actually did brain autopsies of 8 dyslexic brains, and of course controls. So he sliced these brains up, it's a bit gruesome, tiny, tiny, thin slices, and looked at them carefully. So what he found was that there are structural differences in the language area of the dyslexic brain if you compare it to non-dyslexic brains, which is a little odd because dyslexia is now being labeled as a language learning difficulty, and yet it's in the language area. Well, sorry, that's not odd. I'll tell you what's odd. Okay, let me back up. The other thing he found was that there was symmetry. The non-dyslexic brain is asymmetrical, so one side's bigger than the other side. With the dyslexic brain, both sides are pretty much the same size. And what's odd about it is that it is in the language area that we see the increased size. So that's where I was going with the language. So you have a larger language area, and yet you have a language learning difficulty. This is just, I'm not a brain expert, but I think you can have a look and see that in the dyslexic brain, this area, okay, are bigger than in the non-dyslexic brain. Okay, and the other thing he found was that there were more interhemispheric connections. All that means is that you have a left hemisphere of the brain and the right hemisphere of the brain, and the left and right hemisphere have to talk to each other. So on the right brain is visual stuff, and the left brain is language stuff. And if they don't talk to each other, it'd never even be able to label something. I'd never even be able to say microphone, because This would be here in this visual stuff, and the language bit would be there, and I wouldn't be able to put it together. Okay? So we're going to look at each of these, the symmetry, the more interhemispheric connections, and the last one is neuronal migration. Don't get nervous. It just means that some neurons in the dyslexic brain didn't end up where they were supposed to. They ended up in a slightly unusual place. Right? So we're looking at a brain that's not damaged, but a brain that is different than the non-dyslexic brain. And it's definitely not organized for learning to read. Okay. All right, so the first thing, the larger language area. So what Albert Labuda is theorizing is this large language area is not well designed for tight automatic responses. So if you think of reading, the person has to look at this letter T, and they've got to say it's T, or they've got to look at the word THE and say it's the, without in a split second, right? We want that really, really quickly. So that's not working out very well. The dyslexic language brain is big, and what happens, the message kind of gets lost. And sometimes they actually come up with something completely wrong. So with children, I see them, they'll look at the word top and they'll say mop. If I cover that word and I say, what's the first sound what's the first letter, what's the first sound you expect to see in mop? They'll say, no, it's top, it's top, it's top. So they saw it properly, I've covered it, they've seen it properly, they kind of knew what it said, but the message came out wrong. All right, it's not tight and automatic. You also see language learning delays. So some of your adults might tell you that they have a history of language difficulties when they were younger. And it is that same thing of trying to put a word to an object or a name to a face. So that fact that you're trying to put a picture and a sound together. So when you talk to dyslexics, they do a lot of fillers. They do a lot of and thingamy and you know what I mean kind of talk. I have a good story about that one little boy. You know how in well, you're all teaching adults, but you're all probably parents who have had interactions with children. But one term they'll be having scrambled egg every day for breakfast. And then the next term, the mother put scrambled egg. I said, scrambled egg? I hate scrambled egg. I always hated scrambled egg. Why are you giving me scrambled egg? Anyway, this term it was cheese toast. And this little very dyslexic boy every morning told his mother, Mom, can we have, you know, that thing, bread with cheese on one side toasted? Because he couldn't come up with cheese toast. All right? He just couldn't find the word. That kind of language difficulty you see with, and that continues into adulthood. On the positive side, unusual problem-solving difficulties. So the Einsteins and the Edisons and the Steve Jobs, and Richard Bransons of this world are dyslexic. So when I talk about dyslexia, I often say, well, if it wasn't for a dyslexic, Edison, we'd be doing this by candlelight. So we need to thank the dyslexics in this world for where we are now. Okay, so the interhemispheric connection. So get back here, you want to look at something. As far as reading, you want to look at a letter shape, an S or whatever it is, and you want to access that sound, S or Z. So if you have too many interhemispheric connections, it's a bit like trying the difference between going from Port of Spain to San Fernando on this one highway, or trying to find yourself from Miami to wherever it is, and facing one of these big intersections that they have in the States. Easy to get lost. Much easier if you only have one road. So a lot of interhemispheric connections means that that message gets lost. What's interesting about that is that long before Albert Labuda dug into his dyslexic brains, a man called Samuel Orton, who is a neuropsychologist, realized that the main problem dyslexics have was the association of the visual symbol to its sound. It could be a letter to its sound, it could be a string of letters, like a sight word, or like an ending T-I-O-N or T-U-R-E to that sound, or it could be a face to a name, or a handle to the word handle. And the program that you teach was developed by Samuel Orton, Anna Gillingham and Bessie Stillman with that conviction. So I will go into that shortly and talk about why the program you use is ideally suited for dyslexics. Right. That's it. Okay, the neuronal migration is subtle and it's specific in area. The neurons that were supposed to come right here, this area that deals with the letter strings in words, the sounds and the symbols in words, didn't always get there. They ended up somewhere else. Or they maybe didn't actually come right up to the cortex they were supposed to come to. I'm not a brain expert. But it's just not quite well suited to learning strings of information, strings of sounds, that phonological awareness. What are the sounds in this word and can I get them in the right order? Strings of letters, can I get them in the right order? And the other area that's connected right here is your fingertips, the fine motor control, right above that area. And so that sort of out of whack neuronal migration also affects for a lot of learners that fine motor control and being able to get that pencil to do what you want it to do. Thank God for computers. Okay, so it says it possibly affects auditory processing, but I don't know, I think he said possibly, but it definitely affects auditory processing because we see our children and your learners having difficulty getting those auditory events in the right order. So they could be getting all the syllables in the right order, like saying spaghetti instead of spaghetti, or saying hospital instead of hospital. I have a dyslexic son-in-law, and I mean, he has a good sense of humor because there's so many of those sort of novel, multi-syllable words that he finds difficult to say. And you say, tell me again, and he'll try to get it right, and sometimes it just muddles up and he doesn't actually get it right. He says, whatever. So, all right. Okay, so you all do the reading pack. Right, I put a question mark. Still doing reading packs? Paula? Phonics cards, okay, phonics cards. Can you tell me the reason why you do these phonics cards? What do they have at the back of the phonics card? A picture. Do they draw their own picture? Draw their own picture. What's in it? They're tracing, whatever, it's their own work. What's at the front of the phonics card? Okay, so let's think about that. On your right brain, in your right brain, you're dealing with all the visual stuff. So it's much easier for a dyslexic to link that shape to that picture. So 10 to that T, is it 10 to? Okay, 10 to that picture T, and then using that come up with T. So you all are bypassing that interhemispheric connection. Actually, you're not bypassing. If you do the drills often enough, if your learners do their drills often enough, what you're doing is building a superhighway between a visual input, that letter T, to the sound it makes. And what you're trying to get is automaticity. You want that racing car to get across there as fast as possible. You don't want that letter to get lost in that cloverleaf intersection. All right, so does that make sense? So your phonics cards, we call them the reading cards, are essential if you're going to help the dyslexics especially. Do you do a multisensory link or do you call it something different? Okay, the multisensory link is once you've learned that letter and sound, you now say the sound, write it down, and tell me that letter name. Okay, spelling routine, so you say T and you write it down. Yeah. Okay, when you get to the fact that you've learned 4 ways of spelling A, you say A is A consonant E, A-I, A-Y, and then you write it down. Okay. We call that the multisensory link because you're using a multisensory. You are linking the mouth, the sound, and the writing in a multisensory way. Essential for the dyslexic learner. And then the spelling pack, called the spelling routine, is when you just do them all. Everything we've learned so far, we're going through and just writing them all down. Do you do that as a drill? So even though today you're doing SH, you're going to be practicing T, P, all the way through, writing them all down. Getting that, what you heard, what you said, what you heard, what you're seeing in your mind's eye, into your fingertips in an automatic way. So what you're doing with those 3 routines, let me rename them. Phonics cards, spelling routine,
Yeah.
right? What do you call it? When you just do the one you've just learned, that would just be.
That's the one that I'm not doing, so we have to start doing that.
Okay, as you've just taught that spelling phonics card, then the learner really needs to get right away, write that down. So I've learned SH says sh. And now what you have to do is put that away, say the sound for me. Shh. What letter says sh? Write it down. Write it down with your eyes closed. Write it in the air. Write it on the table with your finger, whatever, to get that really solidly in.
So Cathryn, we do that one in beginner.
Yeah.
We do that a lot in beginner.
Yes.
Then we don't do it in level 1. But what we always do is we immediately do an activity that uses the letter.
Okay.
The letter could be in a word or it could just be a letter that you add to the
Right.
word. So we
Right.
will do a practice set.
Yes.
So
Okay.
embed it in an exercise.
So once you use it, there's no use teaching it and not using it. If you don't use it, you lose it. Okay, so what you're doing actually in your lessons that are designed for adult learners is you're also, probably without knowing it, doing exactly what the dyslexia learner needs by building those automatic responses. So doing the phonic cards drill, doing the spelling back drill is exactly what they need. Letter shape to sound, sound to letter shape to the fingertips, which all is what is affected. Does that make sense? So, any questions so far?
You said that in having the disconnect between the 2 hemispheres by teaching them these skills, you build a super highway between the 2 hemispheres. So does someone have a stop becoming dyslexic?
That's a good question. Did you hear it? Yes. Okay. First of all, it's not a disconnect. Now, it's too many connections, so you get lost. It's like too many roads. Okay. You never stop being dyslexic, but you can learn to read, write, and spell very well. On a stressful day, it might fall apart. Under time constraints, things fall apart, but you can go right up. I have students who have a PhD. I have a student who got a scholarship to NYU. So with concessions of time, universities, especially in the States, are very understanding of dyslexia. They have a lot of dyslexic support for dyslexic students. Okay, I can't remember what's next. Let's see what's next. Oh, this one? I forgot I put that in there. Okay, this is another bit of research. This is functional MRI. Everybody knows what an MRI is because now the doctors have MRI. You could break your toe, they want you to go in an MRI machine. So, but in an MRI machine, usually you have to stay very still. But they're now advanced and they can now do functional MRI so that the subject in the machine can do a task. So in this research, there were children. The students were required to do reading or phonological awareness tasks, and they looked at what areas in the brain turned on. Where was this person trying to do this task? Where in the brain? Which was working, because we actually know what's supposed to work because through stroke victims. So we know that if a stroke victim gets a stroke on this side of the brain, they're going to lose certain skills. Or this, they'll lose another skill, or this. So neuropsychologists know what area of the brain normally deals with what function. Okay, so let's see what happened. What they found is that with these students, when they were doing these reading and phonological awareness tasks, there was significantly less activity in both hemispheres, but mostly in that left hemisphere. And if you remember, we were saying that all that phonological awareness, all that auditory stuff, all those strings of sound are over here, right here in this left hemisphere. So there's actually a picture for you. Okay, I don't know if you can actually see this. This is the non-dyslexic reader, not the normal reader. The non-dyslexic reader, and this is the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, and what do you notice? So that there's a lot more activity going on in the left hemisphere with this non-dyslexic person, this person who can read normally. With the dyslexic, or the child reading difficulties, it's the reverse. It's the right side that is trying to do the skill. So in a very simplistic way, sometimes I like to think of dyslexics as right brain people. They are absolutely wonderful at visual spatial skills. They make wonderful architects, interior decorators, choreographers, pilots, business people, because with business, if you just get bogged down in A, then B, then C, then D, you're not going to know what's going on all over your business empire. So a lot of people who have business empires are dyslexic. They're good at it. They can see all of these things all over. So here's the dyslexic using their right visual spatial brain to read. And guess what? It doesn't work. It's not designed for that. But the other thing I'd really like you to notice is to look at how much activity is going on there. So don't tell me these kids are lazy and they're not trying. They're trying. This child is trying more than that child. Yeah, he's putting a lot of effort into this skill. But its brain is not well designed to do that. I think I took out this slide because I thought it was too long, but the good thing is that with intervention, that changes, and the left side begins to take over the activity. So with a lot of intervention, all the stuff that you do, the brain changes. Do you know when the brain stops changing? I heard lots of answers. When you die. When you die. Dr. Conway, who comes down here, says the oldest person he's taught is an 82-year-old woman. So it's never too late. Okay. Hold on. And again. Okay, so just quickly, the ramifications of this different brain is speech and language difficulties, even into adulthood. That doesn't seem to go away that much. So that thingamy and uminy and mispronunciations. I'm not sure how your adults work with this, but certainly for my little ones, a lot of difficulty with rhyming. That's a phonological awareness task. The think, think, drink, blink, all end with the same sound at the end, chunk. If you don't recognize that, then you think that all these words are a brand new word to learn to read and spell, you don't do the sort of automatic thing, oh, well, I can read pink. I can read all these other words. I'm just changing the beginning bit. Rapid naming, so just coming up with words quickly. Poor phonological awareness linked to later reading failure and other school-related difficulties. So I put these are the adults in your class, these are some of the adults in your class. And that training in phonological awareness facilitates word reading ability. So if you train those strings of sounds, then it facilitates reading, which is in fact what you're doing. Because part of what you're doing is you're teaching 5 letters, and then you're stringing them together for reading with your phonics cards, and you're stringing them together for spelling with your spelling routine, right? So you're changing brains. You are. Okay.
Let me just add here that this is a plug-in for doing word building, because you hear what Cathryn just said there. You're stringing your phonics cards together and you're doing reading. You're stringing them together. So you get, when you get in your word building, when you say a word and they have to put the cards, that's spelling. And then when you tell them the cards to put, and then say, what's that word? And you just change 1 letter or 2 letters. This is what Cathryn is talking about. This is what is going to make the brain overcome those too many connections and really zero in. So that's a big, big plug there to do the word building. And all our lists are coming, so we'll have for all programs the list that you can follow. Right? Not just the program people, you'll have me as well. So that's where that slots in.
So you think you're doing what? Word building?
Word building, word building.
And spelling, you're doing phonological awareness. Putting it all together. Keep thinking about my 17-year-old who did not realize he could read bun, because he'd never worked out that you just put these letters into order and make a word. Okay, so with your word cards, I'm sure you do that, your phonics cards, and you change them around. So you have lips, lisp, lips, list. Yes? And just change them around and read. Phonological awareness. Do you do alphabet work or you do use your cards?
We use the cards.
Use your cards, same thing. Okay, so with our little ones, you put out the alphabet and they make words and change the words. So if that says tip, can you make that say tin? If that says tin, can you make that say whatever? Bin, can you make it say nib? So can you change a beginning sound? Can you change an ending sound? Can you change a middle sound? Can you switch the whole thing around? Or can you just change 2 letters? Can you go from list to lips? So if you're doing that with your phonics cards, you're doing phonological awareness work. All right. Okay, so summing up. It's a different brain architecture versus a brain damage model. The differences are specific versus generalized difficulty across the board. So very specific to reading, writing, spelling, handwriting. Thinking skills are not affected. For children, they very often can do very well with the content. They're the ones who have their hand in the air answering all the science questions, but don't ask them to write it down or read it. So the content is fine. Intelligence is not affected. They are creative visual thinkers. So you want to figure out who the dyslexic is in your class, ask them to rearrange the room. How can we get this better so that everybody can see me or see the board? Or if your car isn't working, it's a dyslexic person who's going to figure out, I know those wires go here, there, there, and they're supposed to go here, there, there, and we can fix that. Or with computers, they're fantastic. And of course it can affect reading, spelling, writing, and speech, both receptive and expressive. So that's something to hold on to for you, because the dyslexic might have difficulty expressing what they want to say, but they also sometimes get the wrong end of the stick when you're saying something to them. So you have to be very careful and get back from them. Do they understand what you're saying? because they can have receptive language difficulty too. Remember, it's a language learning difficulty. And this is all more pronounced under stress. So the more light and fun-filled and gay and happy that you can make your class, the more positive you can make your class, the better the dyslexic will do. Once stress is introduced, it falls apart. Okay, now I have some other observations because the literature has gone on and on just recently about this language learning difficulty. But you know, I teach two sets of children who have a specific language difficulty but are not dyslexic. And they are very different from my dyslexic students. And I think you will see this as well. I teach children who have had middle ear infection, chronic middle ear infection since they're babies, and then they get the grommets filled in and that's declared, but they haven't developed a good awareness of sounds in their words, a good language base, because they've virtually been hard of hearing from birth. Wow, those kids just take off because that's the only problem they had. So once we deal with getting these sounds in the right order, the letters match the sounds, they've gone. Bye-bye, out my class, and back to school. The other set of children that I teach who have that kind of language learning difficulty are children who come from sort of disadvantaged homes, or especially children who maybe go to crowded daycare centers where they're not getting any language during the day, or they get minimal language even at home. Child, give me a chance, get out of here, yeah, give me talk, all that kind of thing. You know, we're terrible in Trinidad, huh? We are awful in Trinidad. I see people sitting with their children in the doctor's office and they don't say two words to them, or they get a little smack if they move too much. Or they taxi reach and they just grab the child and pull them out of the car. They'll say, oh look, we reached, or we're almost here, and now we're going to turn left and we're going to go down there, and Granny's gate is, you know, the green one, and no. We need to talk to our children. So many children come to school with a minimal of language experiences, and then they're expected to know that sun begins with S, but they can't do it because they haven't had that language awareness from birth. Okay, those children actually get it faster than the dyslexics, because that's the only problem they have. That's all I've got to deal with, that phonological awareness. You're going to have a lot of students like that in your class. Students who went to school but never figured it out because their language base was weak. The real dyslexic has more than a language-based difficulty. They have difficulty with sequences. Remember I told you that dyslexic, I like to think of them as right-brain people. That's very old-fashioned to say that, but it's absolutely true. On the left brain, we have these sounds, but we also have everything to do with sequences. So the dyslexic kind of error is when they look at fringe and they say finger. Or they look at nerve and they say never. The sequence of the letters doesn't seem to jive with them. The sequence isn't sort of part of what they're noticing. And I like to say that dyslexics make the best predictive text, because if you see a word like nerve, if you think of it never as a more frequent word, you've seen it more often, you hear it more often, you read it more often, you're going to come up with the predictive, the one that you see more often. And all of my students, all of them will look at nerve and say never. All of them will look at fringe and say finger. I can predict it's going to happen. So those sequences are really hard for them. So sometimes just occluding the letters when they're reading them, just going along like that, can help. For spelling, it's the same thing. So it's visual sequencing is out. So the auditory sequencing, so they will spell silk as a slick, or help as a, I can't pronounce that, but HLEP. Yeah, that's a kind of error I see all the time, especially for dyslexics who haven't got the phonics bit. They're trying to hang on to this visual look of the word, and the sequencing lets them down. So very often people will say, well, if they're not good at phonics, let's teach them look and say. They're not good at that either. So the truth is most of English is phonetically regular. If you, like you teach, all the sounds that a letter makes, then let's teach them phonics so that they can really decode and get a handle on it. Okay, so here we have the sequencing difficulty on the auditory side of speech. Adults who say, I'm making myself specifically clear. Misarticulations. I can't think of any. I came up with like crips, but I think trees say that things are cripsy. So I think that's just the fact that you've grown up hearing cripsy, so you think the word is cripsy, or we're going to flim. Or ask me a question, yeah? So those are in our culture. I don't think those are real misarticulations. But with our students, we very often ask them to spell nonsense words. So words that they've never heard or never seen before, because we want to check that they're getting those sounds in the right order. Isn't it really? Is that better? Okay, I want to check, so I might give them a word to say like preconflappment. They'll have a hard time saying that. Preconflappment. Okay. So of course we start with 1-syllable words, 2-syllable words, 3-syllable words, 4, and we train that in speech as well as in reading and spelling. But you will see that with your dyslexics, that misarticulation. Then Mrs. Malaprop, I think she was the original dyslexic. Dancing a flamingo, or Jesus curing the leopards. Just getting those sounds a little wrong. Getting telephone numbers in the right order. Me. Really bad at that. And if your students tell you that, say, well, you know, call it back. Say, let me just see if I've got this right. And teach numbers you say it, because let me tell you, you're going to call back the number you thought you heard, but not the one you wrote. So you just go through, let's see, did I get this right? 6, 2, 7, 5, 4, 9, 2. Yeah, got it right. And then when you're dialing, you might dial it wrong too. So that's a sequencing difficulty. Remembering your own car number. Anybody? No, nobody? Just me, I'm the only one? Remember your own telephone number. And now that we just press Paula or Susan, we don't know anybody's telephone number. So we're not even getting practice in remembering, because practice remembering. Practice, those old days when you had to learn a poem by heart. Or, you know, or when we had to learn a telephone number. That was good for our brain exercise. It's good. We're losing some of the skills we had. And lists of instructions. So certainly in classrooms, if you tell a child, get out your Caribbean Junior English, your homework book, your class book, I want a red and a blue colored pencil and your pencil, and turn to page 62. So if you're giving instructions, kind of write them on the board. Or say, take out your junior English and show it. Take out the blue and the red pencil, show it. Turn to page 62 and write page 62 on the board. And everybody's busy doing what you said them to do. I don't know how that happens, how that pans out in an adult literacy class, but it may be that you want them to turn to a page or do a particular exercise, and it's worth just putting that up on the board so they don't say what you said again. And then I think this is finally that fine motor control we talked about, so handwriting difficulty, dysgraphia. And that dysgraphia is the proper word for handwriting difficulty. This difficulty with graphia, letter shapes I get, graphics. Okay. So what you do as your spelling routine really deals with that, because you now get your adult learner gets an automatic response in their finger, in their muscular memory. So instead of having to sort of remember cognitively, how does my hand have to go to make this letter, it becomes an automatic response, and the writing becomes more fluid and easier. So you're also teaching handwriting. Anybody notice that the handwriting improves as you go along? Yeah, okay, so that's just getting that automatic response. What's my finger have to do? And you're building letter shapes and letter sounds into the muscular memory. So it's like learning to ride a bike or drive a car. When you first start driving a car, first of all, you can't believe you'll ever learn. Especially in Trinidad, where we still have to do hand signals. So we're there, okay, check the rearview mirror, engage the clutch, da-da-da-da, check, put my hand out, right, so you're driving along, and it's a lot of cognition involved when you're learning something. But once you know how to drive, you're driving along, one hand on the wheel, texting, checking the lipstick, whatever. Oh, I must really get rid of that either. Okay, so what you're doing is getting your students there with their handwriting, where it becomes an automatic response. I want to write something, there's a fluid response of my hand across the page, and it's coming out correctly. Which reminds me, something you really have to do. When your learners are spelling, really encourage them to say the letters as they spell, because that bosses their hand. And a typical dyslexic mistake is to say scrap, S-C-R-A-P, and then write it down and put S-R-C-A-P, or miss out the R altogether. So let them sub-vocalize as they're writing. It really helps. Okay, memory. The memory is specifically that sequential memory. Dyslexics are great with what we call episodic memory. That right visual memory. Or I think you play games in ALTA, where you might have to turn over cards and pairs. Okay, you want to know which ones are dyslexics? The ones who always know where they are. It's almost like they can see through the cards. It's just uncanny. They remember where that card was. Absolutely uncanny. That visual spatial ability. Don't we wish we all had it? Well, they all wish they had our sequencing memory ability. Okay, so extraordinary ability with episodic visual spatial memory, but really difficult with that sequential stuff, remembering strings of numbers and all of that. Therefore, that leads to organization difficulties. If you think of the amount of self-talk we talk getting ready to go somewhere. Okay, let me see now, I've got to get my ALTA workbook. I must remember to put a pencil in. Gosh, did I sharpen it? And get my keys, lock the door, whatever. There's a lot of self-talk in organization. Dyslexics are hopeless at organization. They need to marry somebody who's going to organize them. Especially when they move out of the house and mummy's no longer organizing them. And oh boy, are they in a lot of trouble if mummy's a dyslexic one, because the whole house is disorganized. I used to pick up a little boy from school and the mother would come out and say, he can't find his socks. And I'm thinking, this 6-year-old can't find his socks, are you crazy? So he'd come out and he'd have one sock and his sister's sock with a little lacy top. And I know he was already in trouble at school because he wasn't so good at school, so he was already being teased, and now he's going to school with his sister's sock on one side because he, at 6, can't find his socks. Mummy had no idea where they were. Okay. Word finding I talked about, and people's names and faces, which is really embarrassing. Trying to remember. I know you, but I just really can't remember your name. Yeah. Yes, I'm seeing some people laughing. Dyslexic is presumably good at knowing they know that face. Usually it's, boy, I know you. But... Okay, we have a question, sorry.
I think a lot of reading tutors just realise that in one respect, maybe they're dyslexic. The point I wanted to make is, as I understand it from research, because the question I always had is, well, this reading and writing thing is not natural. It's something humans recently developed. So, if some people's brains make it easy to read, and some people's brains make it harder for them to read, what did we use the brain for before reading? And everything I've researched suggests that the part of the brain, or the parts of the brain we used for reading before reading was invented, we used it to recognise faces. So that would fit in, yeah? Recognising faces, recognising letters, and linking with the sound of the person's name. Maybe it's the same problem.
Absolutely, I think you're probably right. That would be an interesting paper. But don't forget that left side is also good for organization and sequencing. So organizing the hunt, being the person who's kind of running the clan maybe, and making sure everybody has their job to do. It's a very interesting concept. But I do know, we do think that one of the reasons why the colonies seem to have a great preponderance of dyslexics is that's the son who wasn't doing so well, who went out of the colonies to find something better to do. Yeah. Or the young person who got into trouble and was sent to Australia in the convict ships. Because we know our prisons are full of people with literacy problems, mostly young men, but some young women too with literacy problems. So maybe we have more dyslexics in Trinidad. And it runs in families, I can tell you. I'm now teaching the daughter of a child I taught. Not the only one, several. So it runs in families. Okay, and then finally, I think just asking your dyslexic learner, your learner, what's hard for you? And empathizing, and maybe even telling them, yeah, that would be hard for you, and you being able to understand, being able to explain it to them. And the reason it's hard for you is, sequences it's hard for you.
So it's okay to tell a student that you are dyslexic? I mean, because you don't want to label them.
Well, I don't think so. That's a good question. I can't say somebody's dyslexic, and I've been teaching dyslexic since 1986, but they have to go to an educational psychologist to get a diagnosis. But I think some dyslexic people, if you know them well enough, feel really relieved when you say, I think you might be dyslexic. I think you might be dyslexic, which is why you're having difficulty with this. Yeah. And when everybody laughed, I was going to say, I think I'm slightly dyslexic because my spelling is abysmal, although I read early. And I'm really glad to know that I can tell people, I'm really sorry I can't remember your name, it's my dyslexia. Because then I kind of have something a scientific thing to lean on. I don't feel, it's not because I'm stupid, I really don't care who you are. It's my dyslexia. Okay, I think that was it. I don't think there's, not a lack of intelligence, not a lack of effort, does not see words backwards. I'm not going to bother back, we've done it. You can leave it up if you like. Okay, any questions? I know we flew through that kind of problem.